Welcome to the Winner's Playbook. Every winner needs a game plan, and this one's for you. Disclaimer: the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book in a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Winner's Playbook. I'm here with my regular co-host, Billy Norman. Billy, what's the latest in your world, mate, and how's the week been?
What's the latest? Yeah, it's been a packed week, Josh. We were just having a chat earlier. Something that's interesting in markets at the moment. We've seen this huge trend of the Magnificent Seven in the US. So that's like these tech giants like Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, etc. The share prices of those businesses has pulled back pretty dramatically over the last few weeks. But what's interesting is that money has flowed into all these other parts of the market. And I saw a note this week showing some of the best performing markets in recent times, and it's the share market in Germany and the Chinese share market.
Go figure.
Yeah, so we might be seeing the end of this trend, which will make our job a bit more interesting. But yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that this week.
Yeah, God, how interesting is that? When you look at most of the index funds out there, like Vanguard, everyone's usually familiar with, the Vanguard International, index funds, and you look at those and I think they're like 75, 80% exposed to the US share market. So it's quite interesting dynamic how that looks like out into the future. You're obviously not telling us to go out and buy the German share market off the back of this, of course, but yeah, I think that probably just talks to more of the importance of that diversification play. And I think that's something a lot of Australians generally get wrong without getting advice. You have that sort of familiarity bias and home bias, and when you start investing, I was no different. Like, I just bought Australian shares. I didn't even think about anything internationally or international. And if you look at the returns over the last few years and even longer term trend, if you were in that as a strategy, just Australia only, like, it wasn't a bad strategy, but particularly in the last couple of years, there's been a massive differential between the international share market performance relative to the Australian share market performance. So it's quite stark.
Yeah, and there's so much advice, especially on social media. There's so many people just saying, just buy the S&P 500. That's all you need to do. And it's like it's recency bias. Like, S&P 500's been awesome for 10 years. It's not going to continue necessarily on the same trajectory. So you're going to be careful of these, believing all this stuff you hear, because these things change. So that's what's happening at the moment.
You're saying past performance is not an indicator of future performance, Billy?
Yeah, but it's boring wording it that way. So. But it's spot on. And sometimes the worst performing assets are a massive buying opportunity. So you don't want to just follow, last year's winners aren't always the best place to be investing. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking at a lot with clients. I've got some clients been on the sidelines with, just by way of timing, sold some property and retiring, got lots of money to deploy at this point in time. So it's a great opportunity. It's sort of like discount sales at this point in time. Of course, no one knows how low the market will go. But if you can start chipping away, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if you are investing longer term. But that's, of course, not what we're actually talking about today. We're going to be talking about the true cost of raising kids. And this is something I can actually talk about because I've got a 4.5-month-old at home. 12 months ago, I wasn't qualified to talk about this one, other than obviously working with a lot of clients with families and I've got some experience through that and seeing what it takes or costs to raise a family. But if we jump into it, Billy, the big opening question we've got here is, how much does it actually cost to raise a child? I remember Steve, one of the podcasts last year, we sort of spoke loosely around what it might cost. Like you might add 20 or 25% to your budget with a growing family. But I'd be curious, obviously you got a couple of kids. What's been your experience or take on what that cost looks like? And can you measure it and put it to a percentage? I know it's never going to be the same or exact for any one couple, but do you have a bit of a take on what that looks like?
Yeah, I do. So ChatGPT and Google give you a range of somewhere between, so this is for a lifetime cost, so over like 20 years, so until they're hopefully somewhat independent. The range is $150,000 to over $1 million.
Over 20 years?
Yeah. So the million, that's private school fees, right? There's a chunk of that. Childcare, private school fees are a big chunk. But there's a huge cost that's not even in that. And that's lost earnings. Like if you're in a couple where you're both working and you have one or more kids, it's more often than not, both members of the couple are not going to work full time through that whole period.
Yep.
So the lost earnings means that number could be a lot higher.
And well, your time as well. It goes to your time as well. That I think that correlates with your lost earnings. Like, what's your actual time worth? So I think the old AI or ChatGPT, there's maybe downplaying it a little bit because you throw
conservative. I'd say conservative.
Yeah, you throw that time factor into it as well, and you translate to what your time's worth over that that time frame. It obviously, that really eats away at it big time. But what are usually, other than schooling, what are some of the big main costs that you experience? Because how old are the kids on your own, Billy? I don't know if we've mentioned that on the podcast yet.
Yeah, we should probably mention it. So I got 2 boys who are 4 and 6. So we've been in primary school for a bit over a year now, and now it's like, okay, what high school? Initially we thought, public school's fine, and now of course we're looking at the private schools and all those things and trying to figure out if that's the best move and how we can achieve it and so on.
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing these numbers. I'm like, holy shit! Like this is blown it. Like early on, you're thinking about, I have to buy a pram, I have to buy a car seat, I have to buy nappies. And now I'm looking at school fees and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Or like, we need a bigger house. It's like if you're talking about houses and cars, and now it's that $1 million has just been maybe double it. So it's huge.
When you add all of that together, it really is. The million's not even in the ballpark or range. I don't think. Like from my end, I guess the initial hit is all those things you mentioned, like pram and baby seat and so on. Like there's definitely an initial hit of that furniture, and I don't know, maybe there's $5,000 or something you might spend up front when you're just having kids to get it all set up. But one thing I would say is my wife's very good at this. She's very savvy with, and her mum, actually my mother-in-law, very savvy of a lot of the clothes that we've got is actually my wife Alana's little brother, who's he's about 21 or 22. Alana's mum held on to all of his clothes, cleaned them up, vacuum sealed them away, and they've been in the dungeon for 20 years, and they've now come out. So little Leon is actually pretty much decked out in terms of clothes for quite some time. So that's actually really helped, and that's probably a point of mentioning of maybe being a bit savvy with some of the stuff you're buying, and if you're going to have more kids, taking greater care of it. I know when in those first couple of months, Leon had a few blowouts in terms of had a few blowouts of the nappy, and Alana was so quick to say, get the spray on there on the clothes, and we got to preserve it so it still looks nice. Whereas I would have been no idea what to do at that point in time. But look, it's obviously going to vary on your situation. So we're in a fortunate position where we're breastfeeding as well. So really the only cost for us right now is just nappies essentially. But then that obviously changes the older they get and going on to solids and so on as well. And then all the toys are starting to already happen. So you start throwing in all of those, and it really piles up. But is there any major unexpected expenses, like the ones that people don't think about?
Yeah, I mean, medical costs can creep up on you. Planned and unplanned, depending on the child and everything else. But these days, public healthcare, it's not really all free the way it perhaps used to be in Australia. So those costs can mount, and then spending money at the pharmacy and all those sorts of things. Yeah, that creeps up on you. And I think I just remembered one of my friends said to me years ago, he said, kids sort of introduce things to you slowly. Like at first you think, this isn't that hard. And then the things just sort of evolve and build over time. So you can start out pretty, like doing it in a pretty thrifty way, right? Like getting hand-me-downs and buying stuff secondhand and so on. But then as it goes on, especially if you have a second kid, it starts to all build, and then they can talk. Now they're demanding things all the time. So you find, money starts getting a bit out of control, I think. So the initial cost doesn't have to be high. You can do it on the cheap, but I think it tends to build over time, I think.
So
maybe this ties into what we were talking about last week with lifestyle creep.
Yeah.
Like if you've got the income to do it and you have kids, you find the spending on the kids can be a big part of that.
Yeah. So you're sort of scaring me a bit, Billy, looking down the barrel of 2 or 3 kids for us. We've got the one, and we're looking at going 2 or 3, but we'll see how that, of course, plays out. But this probably gets into a bit of planning for this, and that's obviously what we do as financial advisors. And how can parents then plan for childcare, education, sports, etc. I don't know if the kids are into too much in the sports side, but I know some of the other advisors here every weekend they're just running around for their kids basically as a chauffeur, taking them between all of these different activities, and I can only imagine the costs, with that.
Yeah, well, just entertaining them, especially once they can talk and tell you what they want to do, which might be different every week. So entertaining them, taking them out of the house to do things usually involves spending money.
Yeah.
Kids' birthday parties, that adds up. You got to buy presents and all that stuff, or have a party for your kid, which can cost a bunch of money. And yeah, sports, yeah, and it all just sort of adds up. Like it sort of gets a bit more complicated over time, I think.
That one,
but you've got time to
yeah.
figure that out. Like it's not all at once.
Yeah, the kid's birthday party is an interesting one. I tell you what, the amount of times I see on Instagram a first-year-old's turning 1, and it's probably better than any birthday I ever had in my entire life. Like there's a
Yep.
there's a function hall that's been hired out. The balloons, there's all this. There's like a full catered birthday. I don't know. I don't know about some of that. I don't know if little Leon will actually remember any of those things. And I think that's where you got to. I think some of that sometimes can be a bit of the keeping up with the Joneses type situation, where you're in that friend group, the friends are doing it, all their kids. So, one person sets the bar here, you got to at least hit that, or you're going to outdo it. And you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on that. Whereas, I don't know, I'd prefer to, either you're buying more toys or more things that the babies or your child's going to use, or maybe spend that on memories and go travel. I think that's just a lot of society at the moment. It's just a lot of, and we've spoken about it before. One of the biggest like wealth detractors or inhibitors, whatever you want to call it, is that comparison to others can be super. It can be quite deadly to your ability to build wealth in a way if you're always comparing yourself to others and really trying to keep up with them. It's never a good game to play, and that leads into the point of like what sort of financial habits should families be building to secure their future. Like the biggest one for me is like you just got to nail and have a cash flow system and not be reactive with it. And we've spoken about that I think over the last couple of podcasts, like having a system for that. And that's something I had to redo at the beginning of the year when Leon came along, in terms of what those allocations were for each of those accounts and how much we're going to be spending on a weekly basis, and then planning for the future. So we, Lana and I have looked at, what private schooling would cost, and then have opened up some investment vehicles or structures to actually get ahead of the game. Not that I don't feel like I couldn't just pay for it sort of 5 or 6 years down the line. I'm not actually too concerned about that, but I would, I don't want to just have the shock of the hit when the time comes when schooling starts, because again, I've seen that a lot with clients. So we're being proactive 5, 6, 7 years ahead of the time here, and starting to bucket a small amount of money away. That's going to grow up probably 8 to 10% over that period of time. And excuse me, we'll do that for virtually each of the kids, and therefore any of those sort of expenses, they're not unexpected because they're planned. Well, we're in a good position to sort of tackle them ultimately as they arise. But outside of nailing your cash flow and getting deliberate with targeting some of those expenditures, any other major habits, Billy, you can think of?
Well, I think you make a really good point about the keeping up with the Joneses thing. On the birthday parties, a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old does not care what the birthday party is. If there's some cake and some toys, then they're happy. Like you don't need to be renting out venues and things like that. So certainly before they hit primary school, there's no need to go and spend a bunch of money on anything.
Yeah.
Once they hit schooling, it is tougher, of course, because they're at school and their kids have certain toys that they want and all that stuff. So it is difficult. But I think the main thing you can do, obviously, have a cash flow system, and if you are considering private school, it is so powerful planning for that ahead of time. If you start investing even a small amount when they're really little and they're not going to private school until high school, you've got a long period of time to build up a fund for that. And that's very powerful.
And it doesn't.
That's what we do for clients. That's what we do for clients, especially if they've got 2 kids and they're going to a top end private school. It's like 80 grand a year. It's a huge amount to grab out of your cash flow. So you definitely want to be, you want to essentially start setting aside that money years ahead of time. So you're already in that habit of setting aside that amount each month.
Yeah, because it can be a bit misleading sometimes when you look at, say, private schooling fees, if it's 5, 10, 15, or 20 or even more per year, but you're looking at you got to spend your after-tax dollars to make that repayment. So, we looked at some schools and I think they're like $500,000 over prep to sort of year 12. So realistically, think about paying that. You're nearly earning about $1 million over that period of time that you're going to spend then on that schooling. So don't just think about it of you're seeing $24,000 or $25,000 for the year. You're probably earning $40,000 or $50,000 nearly to actually make that repayment, which can be quite daunting. But what if we talk to some of the investment structures and no, it doesn't necessarily mean kids like for your education purposes. I have a lot of clients that actually set some things up in advance for helping kids' future wedding, if that's really big in their culture. It could be to help them buy their first home. I'm working with a couple of clients at the moment that are really big on getting their kids into a home. And yeah, it's not necessarily all just about the education, but what are some of the structures we're typically looking at around that, Billy? What sort of options do we have?
Yeah, the majority of clients we see that have started saving for a child, they're doing it in cash, which we all know is if you're talking about a young child and you're early in that saving journey, that is definitely not the best way to be doing it.
Yeah,
it's cash. You're gonna pay tax on the interest. You're not gonna achieve. There's no growth there.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to use growth assets, primarily share markets, I'd say for that. And then, the ownership structure is important too, because you're going to pay tax on all the returns there. So we'll often use investment bonds. They're perfect for this sort of thing. It's got preferential tax treatment. It's got some estate planning benefits. So it's a structure where you can nominate a child as a beneficiary for that asset. And you just sit it there, you make your regular contributions every month, and then down the track, you might use it for schooling, or you might decide we don't need to tap into it. You let it keep growing, and one day you might be chipping in for a house deposit or something like that for your kids.
Yeah. So the investment bonds, for everyone listening, maximum tax rate, 30%, but that depends on the actual underlying investment that you do select. Some of the investment options, they've got like this sort of tax optimization function built internally within it. So the tax rate year to year might be a bit lower, of between sort of 15 to 20%, but it's really an investment bond is just like another investment structure you can invest in. And it's probably closely aligned in a way to superannuation in that there's a set tax rate, but different than super because you can access it at any point in time. It's not like super where it is locked away until age 60. But yeah, most clients I talk to about an investment bond, it's the first time they've ever heard of it. And then the main things you understand is the tax treatment. After 10 years time of investing through an investment bond, you can sell it entirely tax-free. There's no strings attached to that. The only thing you need to be conscious of is how much you can put into an investment bond, because that is like super, because it is a tax-friendly environment. There are some restrictions around how much money you get in, which is year one, unlimited, get as much as you want in the first 12 months. And then every year thereafter, that 125% contribution rule applies, which essentially means in year one, if you put $10,000 in year two, you can only put $12,500 in. And if you were to exceed that or break it, essentially you reset that 10-year period. So you do have to be a little bit conscious around how much you are investing to an investment bond, and hence obviously getting advice around this stuff is crucial, because I have had a couple of clients before in the past who started with a certain level of contribution, and then they got quite a fair amount of large bonuses come in, and they wanted to actually get it into the investment bond that was structured and set up, but it would have massively exceeded the 125% contribution rule. And because they were quite a few years into the investment bond, we didn't want to lose how close we were to getting to the 10-year mark. So instead, in that situation, we just opened up another couple of investment bonds for some other kids that they then had in the years later. So the investment bonds are good, but they definitely got to be conscious and also of your own tax bracket as well. If you're not in a high tax bracket, an investment bond may not actually be the right way to invest. You might possibly be better off just investing in your own name if you've got a spouse who's on a low income, or maybe they're not even working in the first place. And that's where it's like you got to really look at all those different options. Family trust is something that usually comes into play for a lot of our clients as well. And investing via a family trust. You can then distribute that income year to year through the family trust to the lowest the lowest taxed beneficiary in the family group. So there are a lot of options there. And the one I don't know if you've seen too many clients, Billy, but I've had a few clients as of late talk about actually investing in the child's name. And that stuff is actually a bit grey. If you actually look at in the ATO, it's like it can be quite actually hard to understand how that works from a taxation perspective. Have you seen any of that, Billy? I have looked into it a little bit lately with investing actually in a child's name when they're below the age of 18. Have you had any clients bring that up for you?
Yeah, well, they have those minor tax rates, right? Where
Yeah.
essentially they just, if you invest in a child's name, you can be whacked with like a massive tax rate.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, it's not a good idea. The bonds work well, family trust can work well. So we look at those options. But the key thing is really, firstly, not using cash, using something that's going to get you a higher return over time,
Yeah.
and then just making sure you're adding to that every month. Add to that every month for years and years and years. You'll have a big asset there to draw down on in the future.
Yeah, and real rate of return on cash, like you said, say you're getting, well, it's not 5% probably now because the interest rates have been cut in Australia, but maybe close to 5% is your better high interest saver. You get your 5%, and then if you're in the highest tax bracket, 47%, you virtually lose half. So your real rate of return is closer to 2.5%. Not many people actually understand that that's how it works. And then you add in the great old inflation into that, the cost of living and everything, services going up around you. Your real rate of return is what that's called, is when you strip out inflation on that, you might be actually not making any money whatsoever when you take out taxes and then you account for inflation. And it really talks to the point of what you were saying, Billy, where if you are investing for the long term, you've got to be considering those higher growth assets like shares, some property exposure. There's obviously a lot of ways that you can actually do that. And then once you've looked at that, well, then what structure are we investing in? How long are we going to be investing for? What's the actual target we're aiming? Look, there is obviously a lot of options in that space, and that's where it is obviously crucial in terms of getting your own underlying financial advice and figuring out what it exactly looks like for your family, because what works for you, Billy, may not work for me, and that goes for any of the other clients that we actually speak with as well. But before we close out, Billy, was there any other notes that you had on your own, mate? Any other words of wisdom, or anyone that's maybe got kids or feeling like they're under the pump or they're planning on having kids? Do you reckon there's anything else that we haven't? Well, actually, I would say there was one I had a thought before. Childcare. I don't have personal experience in that. That's obviously a massive one. I see some clients who don't get any childcare subsidy getting absolutely slugged by the way of how much they pay in childcare fees. Do you want to let's finish on that? Can you talk us to a little bit just around those childcare fees, subsidy, just a bit of an intro there?
Yeah, well, I'll just start by saying I spent 30 grand on childcare in 1 year.
Wow.
That was a one-off because I had 2 kids in there and my wife was studying and working. So we just, for a period of time, we had to have them both in there 5 days a week.
Huge.
So that was a one-off, but that was crippling. And I was like, we're actually pretty much paying private school fees right now.
Yeah. True. So true.
Yeah, so you've got some options here. Ideally, with a couple, ideally at least one of you has some level of flexible work. If you're both shift workers, it's really hard.
Brutal.
But if at least one of you has flexible hours or one of you's part-time, then you can try and work the system a bit. Like you've got the council run kinders and so on. So there's some free care available. If you're fortunate enough to have parents and family help, that makes a massive difference. But really, you just really need to plan it out with your partner. Like what's work going to look like, what's care going to look like, and try and figure it out from there. With childcare, yes, there's subsidies, but of course, every time they increase the subsidies, the childcare centres jack up the fees. But yeah, you just really need to understand the rules and try and plan it ahead of time, like what's going to work for your family, and plan it out that way. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen some situations where what one of the say the wife had some time off and then goes back in, and then there's the childcare cut starts coming in on top of it. And I've seen some situations where because of what they were earning as a family group, they weren't getting much of a subsidy, and it was nearly to a point of like, what was the point of wife going back into work in that situation, because of when you strip out, like you said, in your situation, say $30,000 of childcare fees a year on an after-tax basis. Like if you're not earning more than say $50,000, you're kind of going to be going backwards in that situation, because you earn your 50 and you're kind of just earning the 50 to pay the childcare. Yep. So I've seen a few sort of pretty drastic scenarios like that. But look, there's obviously a lot of different areas, and that's why I think, if you're going to have kids, in the past, I've seen some people and they didn't even think about any of these things. Like they weren't thinking about childcare. What was it going to cost to get set up and actually have a family? So obviously if you're going to have kids, well, think about all of these in advance and what your cash flow needs to look like. Do you maybe need to delay having kids and get your earnings up, get your investment assets up? I can't disagree more with the fact when people say there's no right time to have kids. I strongly disagree. Don't get me wrong. If it happens, it happens. But and you just got to roll with it. But if we can all plan out how our life is going to be in a way and control some of that to an extent. And I can only reflect on my own life. Like we were planning on having kids a little bit earlier, and I said to my wife, Alana, I'm like, just give me a bit of time here. Let's just wait a few years. Let me go and got to build into the business and build the career and get all the assets up. And I do think there is a better time to have kids, and in reflection of looking at some people I've seen throughout my life who didn't do it that way and just struggling to get by. Look, that's no judgment, but that's just that's not the life I want for my family. If someone wants that and wants to be really reactive and not plan for the future, they're cool, but it's just really not how I govern my own life. Anything you would add there, Billy, before we close out, mate?
Yeah, look, for people who aren't pregnant, haven't had kids yet, and they're thinking about it, I think it is important to think about careers and what will work for your family long term, because with the childcare example I just gave, we're past that. We're not paying 30 grand a year now, right? And then once your kids are in primary school, ideally you're not paying much at all for care. So there's a really expensive period there if you're using paid daycare, but you get through it. So as a couple, you really just want to think about what's my career trajectory going to look like and how we're going to get through that first few years as a couple, right? Are we going to have one breadwinner who's bringing in most of the income? Are we going to share that load? Are we going to take leave at different times? Are we going to go part-time? Try and figure out what balance will work for you. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think it's as simple as that. It's just, again, like I always say, just be proactive, not reactive, and realistically just have a plan. So we'll close it out from there, and that's all we've got time for today. And thanks for everyone who is tuning in. If you're getting value out of it, please give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple. Share us around. Check out our social medias. Our social media channels. We're all over LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, virtually any social media. You should be able to find us, and we do have a weekly newsletter that goes out if you can't get enough of the podcast. And don't always forget to check out the Brokers Lounge, which is the 2 brokers in the business, Eddie and Carlo. They've also got a podcast running side by side, covering off a lot of different other topics that we necessarily don't always cover in the Winners Playbook. So if you ever want to chat about your personal situation, always jump on the website and you can reach out to any of the advisors. But until next time, Billy, I'll see you then and leave it at that.